Dr. Lila Keene, respected therapist, polished smile, flawless victim story. She said the accident wasn't her fault. She said she didn't remember. But when the judge pressed play, the courtroom fell silent. Because what showed on that screen wasn't trauma. It was truth. The kind that can't be forgotten, no matter how hard you try. Before we show you the moment the entire courtroom gasped, make sure you're subscribed, turn on that notification bell, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, because what you're about to witness is how a single video turned lies into a life sentence. This story is a work of fiction and not based on real events. The sound of rain against the courthouse windows was steady, too steady, almost rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the building itself. It had been raining since morning, and by the time Dr. Lila Keene took her seat at the defense table, the city outside looked washed of all color. She sat upright, hands folded neatly, her expression serene, almost too serene for a woman accused of lying under oath. On paper, she was the kind of person juries usually sympathized with. A trauma therapist, 29 years old, articulate, graceful, soft-spoken. But today, every word she'd ever said, every tear, every tremor, every story was about to be questioned. Judge Eleanor Shaw adjusted her glasses and spoke in her even, deliberate tone. This court is now in session in the matter of State versus Dr. Lila Keene. The defendant stands charged with perjury and obstruction of justice. Lila's lawyer, Martin Hale, placed a reassuring hand on her arm. He was older, experienced, and calm in the way that only comes from having lost cases before. "Stay composed," he whispered. "We're not here to argue guilt yet. We're here to show there's context." But the prosecutor, Miles Garner, didn't believe in context, only evidence. He rose from his chair with a slim file in hand and walked toward the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, 6 months ago, this very woman testified as a witness in the trial of Evan Morales, the man charged with vehicular manslaughter. She swore under oath that she had never met him before that night, that she was simply a good Samaritan who stopped to help. He paused, opening the file. But we have reason to believe that statement wasn't born from trauma. It was born from calculation. Lila looked straight ahead, calm, still. Garner continued, his tone sharpening. Dr. Keene has since claimed she suffered from dissociative memory loss, a trauma response, she says, that made her forget critical details. But memory loss doesn't send text messages. Memory loss doesn't delete phone records. Memory loss doesn't lie under oath. A faint murmur rippled through the gallery. Martin Hale rose in objection. "Your Honor, the prosecution is arguing facts not yet in evidence." "Sustained," Judge Shaw replied, though her gaze lingered briefly on Lila. Curious, almost searching. As the courtroom settled, Lila finally spoke. Her voice calm, precise, every syllable deliberate. "I didn't lie," she said quietly. "I was triggered during my testimony. I have trauma, and sometimes trauma protects you by making you forget." The judge nodded slightly. "We'll get to that, Dr. Keene. For now, you'll have your chance to explain." From the back row, a reporter scribbled furiously, circling the word trauma. The irony was impossible to ignore. A trauma specialist claiming her own trauma as defense. When the court recessed for 10 minutes, Martin leaned closer. "They'll go for your credibility. You need to stay human, not clinical." Lila's lips curved faintly, almost a smile. "I am human, Martin, just not the kind they want me to be." Outside, a thunder rolled low over the city. Inside, her case was only just beginning, because in less than 24 hours, a single piece of video evidence, one she swore didn't exist, would make the entire courtroom go silent. And when it did, not even Dr. Lila Keene would be able to hide behind her own diagnosis. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the bailiff wheeled in a small monitor and projector cart. A USB drive glinted under the fluorescent glow. An ordinary object that now carried extraordinary weight. Prosecutor Miles Garner stood beside it, his jaw set, his expression calm but certain. He'd spent the past week verifying every second of the footage on that drive. It wasn't grainy or unreliable. It wasn't rumor or theory. It was time-stamped, clear, and damning. Judge Eleanor Shaw adjusted her chair. Mr. Garner, I assume you're prepared to present the new evidence you referenced in your opening. Yes, Your Honor. He held the USB between two fingers. This is surveillance footage obtained from a private establishment near Riverview Street, the Hayden and Hart Lounge, recorded on the night of February 18th. A faint shift in the defense table. Lila's lawyer, Martin Hale, frowned. Your Honor, we were informed of new evidence, but not the nature of it. If this involves my client's personal counsel, the judge interjected softly, you'll have your chance to object once relevance is established. Proceed, Mr. Garner. Miles nodded, turning toward the screen as the technician loaded the file. 6 months ago, Dr. Keene testified that she had never met the defendant in the Morales case before the night of the crash, that she simply found him on the roadside and attempted CPR. This footage suggests otherwise. The projector flickered to life, static, then movement. The image sharpened. A dimly lit bar, two people seated in a corner booth, faces illuminated by candlelight. One of them, unmistakably Lila Keene, laughing, leaning forward, her hand resting on the arm of a man later identified as Evan Morales, the same man she'd claimed she didn't know. A collective murmur rose through the gallery. Martin shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is a gross violation of privacy, and the footage has not been authenticated by... Overruled, said Judge Shaw. The court will determine admissibility once we've heard the full presentation. Continue. The video played on. Lila, her hair tied up loosely, lifted a glass. The date stamp at the bottom corner read February 18th, 11:46 p.m. Precisely 4 hours before the fatal crash. Then came the part that froze everyone. The audio, faint but clear, caught her voice. He shouldn't have to take the fall. People believe trauma. They don't check the facts. A hush fell. Miles turned off the screen. The courtroom's silence felt physical. Judge Shaw's pen stopped mid-motion. Martin looked at his client in disbelief. Lila, tell me that's not you. Her face was pale, expression unreadable. It's old, she said quietly. It's out of context. That was a hypothetical conversation. I was consulting. Consulting your own witness, Miles cut in. You expect this court to believe that a trauma therapist discussing people believing trauma on the same night as the crime was just speaking hypothetically? Martin raised his hand. Your Honor, the prosecution is editorializing. My client has medical documentation of dissociative amnesia. She's not lying. She's fragmented. Trauma survivors often recall events in pieces, but Judge Shaw wasn't listening to the lawyer. Her eyes were on Lila. Dr. Keene, she said evenly, you testified under oath that you never met Mr. Morales before the crash. Do you maintain that statement? Lila hesitated. For just a second too long. I believed that to be true at the time. Miles leaned forward. So your position is that you simply forgot having drinks with the man hours before the accident you were testifying about? She exhaled slowly. Trauma changes memory, Mr. Garner. You wouldn't understand. He looked her straight in the eyes. You're right, he said quietly. But the jury will. The judge gestured toward the bailiff. We'll recess for 15 minutes. I suggest both parties prepare for a very long afternoon. The gavel struck once, sharp as a crack of thunder. Lila sat frozen as the screen went black. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she could control the narrative anymore. Because in the age of truth and evidence, the only story that mattered now was the one she couldn't rewrite. By the time the recess ended, the courtroom felt heavier. Not louder, but weighted with quiet disbelief. People avoided meeting each other's eyes like they'd all just watched something sacred unravel. Lila returned to her seat, her composure restored in fragments. She adjusted her blazer, crossed her legs neatly, and folded her hands like a professional ready for an interview. The faint tremor in her fingertips betrayed otherwise. Judge Eleanor Shaw glanced up from her notes. Mr. Garner, you may proceed with your cross-examination. The prosecutor stood, calm and deliberate. Thank you, Your Honor. He walked to the center of the courtroom, turning to face Lila. Dr. Keene, earlier you stated you had no recollection of meeting Mr. Morales prior to the night of the crash. Is that correct? Yes, she said softly. At the time, I didn't remember. And you maintain that this memory loss was caused by trauma? Yes, Miles nodded, as if considering that. Then, with a slow movement, he lifted another document from his table, a stack of printed phone logs. Then perhaps you can explain these. He handed them to the bailiff, who brought them to the witness stand. Those are text records between your phone and Mr. Morales's, Miles continued. 37 messages exchanged over the 2 weeks preceding the crash. I've highlighted one sent at 8:14 p.m., 3 hours before that bar footage. Lila glanced down. The page trembled slightly in her hands. Read it aloud, please, Miles said. Her lips parted. I'll help you fix this. Just stick to what we planned. A soft gasp rippled through the courtroom. Miles stepped closer. Is that your message? It appears to be, she replied cautiously. But trauma survivors often act out of confusion. I was trying to help him emotionally. You were trying to help him legally, weren't you? Her voice sharpened. I don't recall. Miles smiled thinly. Convenient. Defense attorney Martin Hale rose. Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Shaw said calmly, but her gaze didn't leave Lila. Miles didn't press further. Instead, he turned to the jury. You've now seen the video and the texts. But there's one more inconsistency. He walked back to his desk, retrieving a small digital recorder. This was found in Dr. Keene's office during a civil inquiry into her private practice. On it, she can be heard rehearsing her testimony before the Morales trial. She says, quote, Martin interrupted. Objection. That's inadmissible hearsay unless it's the defendant's own voice, Miles countered. Judge Shaw nodded. Admitted. Proceed. Miles pressed play. The sound filled the room. Faint but unmistakable. Lila's own voice, calm and professional. If I cry when I say it, they'll believe me. No one questions a woman who looks like she's breaking. Gasps again. Reporters scribbled furiously. The jury collectively inhaled. Lila's face drained of color. That was a role-play exercise, she said quickly. Therapists use rehearsal techniques for empathy modeling. Miles folded his arms. And this was for empathy, or was it for performance? No answer. The judge leaned forward slightly. Dr. Keene, you understand you're under oath? Yes, Your Honor. Then, let me be clear, Judge Shaw said evenly. Trauma doesn't excuse deception. It explains it sometimes, but it does not erase responsibility. For the first time, Lila's eyes glistened, but the emotion wasn't remorse. It was fury. She whispered something to Martin, who touched her wrist gently, trying to calm her, but it was too late. The courtroom had seen through her. The performance was cracking, piece by piece, and behind it wasn't a frightened survivor, but a woman who'd built her whole defense on a lie too fragile to survive playback. By the next morning, the courthouse felt different. The curiosity that once drew people in had turned to quiet condemnation. The gallery wasn't packed with reporters anymore. Just locals, survivors, and victims of other crimes who wanted to see what happened when someone tried to twist their pain into currency. Lila arrived early, escorted by her attorney, her hair tied in a tight bun now. Her once poised demeanor had grown defensive. She no longer smiled for the cameras. Her lips were a firm, colorless line. Judge Eleanor Shaw entered promptly at 9, robe flowing, expression composed as ever. Court is now in session, she said. The defense may call its next witness. Martin Hale stood. The defense calls Dr. Nadia Torres, licensed psychiatrist and trauma specialist. A woman in her 50s, with calm eyes and silver-rimmed glasses, stepped to the stand. She took the oath, then sat down, folding her hands gently in her lap. Martin approached. Dr. Torres, you've reviewed my client's psychological history. I have. And what is your professional opinion regarding her claim of memory loss? The doctor's voice was measured. Dr. Keene's reported symptoms align with patterns of dissociative amnesia, which can occur after a triggering event. It's possible she genuinely lost access to certain memories at the time of her testimony. Lila sat taller, glancing at the jury, her eyes glimmering, just faintly. Martin nodded. So, to clarify, she may not have intentionally lied. She may have believed her version of events to be true. That's correct. The prosecutor, Miles Garner, waited patiently for his turn. When Martin finished, he rose and walked toward the witness box with the calm focus of a surgeon. Dr. Torres, he began, you've been practicing psychiatry for how long? 23 years. And would you say you're familiar with Dr. Keene's work? I am. She was once my resident, the courtroom murmured. A small but telling ripple of surprise. Miles nodded slowly. Interesting. You trained her? Yes. And you're aware that her license was suspended 3 years ago for falsifying 2 therapy case summaries? The air went still. Dr. Torres hesitated. That was later resolved through review. Resolved doesn't mean disproven, does it? No. Miles took a step closer. So, to summarize, you're testifying in defense of a woman you personally mentored, who was previously disciplined for manipulating patient records, and your testimony relies entirely on her self-reported trauma? Dr. Torres stiffened. I evaluated her professionally. Of course you did, Miles turned to the jury. And yet, you never performed a forensic interview, correct? That's correct. And you're being compensated by the defense for today's appearance? Yes, at standard rate. He smiled faintly. Not cruelly, but knowingly. Doctor, you said dissociative amnesia can cause people to forget painful events. But can it make someone delete texts? Can it make someone rehearse false testimony? Not directly. Thank you. He turned toward the judge. No further questions. Torres looked down, her credibility crumbling quietly under the weight of her own answers. As she stepped down, Lila avoided her gaze. The connection between mentor and student, once professional, now poisoned by exposure, dissolved silently. Judge Shaw broke the stillness. Does the defense have another witness? Martin shook his head. No, Your Honor. Then we'll proceed to judicial inquiry this afternoon. Her tone was calm, but her eyes flicked to Lila for a long, unblinking moment. Not unkind, but sharp, as though measuring whether there was anything real left in her. Lila folded her hands again, lowering her gaze. She'd built her career studying human behavior. She'd taught others how to read guilt, how to coax truth. But now, sitting under fluorescent light and public scrutiny, she realized the cruel irony. She'd become her own case study, and the results weren't in her favor. When the court reconvened that afternoon, Judge Eleanor Shaw didn't immediately call for either attorney. Instead, she leaned forward on the bench, her expression thoughtful, almost weary. The air in the room felt thinner somehow, as if everyone had already sensed what was coming. Dr. Keene, the judge began, before we proceed to closing arguments, I have a few questions of my own. Lila looked up, startled. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Shaw's tone was even. You've spoken about trauma, about memory loss, and about being a victim of your own mind. But something isn't sitting right, so I'd like to hear from you. Not your attorney. In your own words. Martin Hale started to rise, but she raised a hand. Counsel, you'll have a chance to advise your client afterward. For now, I want to understand who I'm looking at. Lila hesitated, then straightened in her chair. I've told the truth as I remember it, she said quietly. I've spent years helping others heal from trauma. I never imagined I'd have to defend myself this way. The judge nodded. Helping others heal. That's admirable work. Tell me, when your patients confide in you, when they cry or shake or confess things they regret, how do you tell when they're telling the truth? Lila blinked. I listen to their tone, their eyes, their body language. And what do you look for? Consistency, she said automatically. How their story feels, emotionally. Real trauma isn't rehearsed, it spills out. The courtroom stayed deathly still. Judge Shaw tilted her head slightly. And does yours? Lila froze. The words seemed to hang between them. Soft, almost kind, but cutting deeper than any accusation so far. The judge leaned forward. You're a professional, Dr. Keene. You know how memory works. You know how to manipulate narrative and emotion, and you've told this court you forgot entire conversations, entire relationships, yet you remember every sympathetic detail of your own pain. That's not how amnesia behaves. That's how strategy does. Martin finally stood. Your Honor, sit down, counselor, Shaw said calmly. I'm not accusing your client. I'm asking her to look at herself. She turned back to Lila. You told the jury trauma protects you by making you forget. But from where I sit, you didn't forget the truth. You just hoped the truth forgot you. A murmur swept the gallery. Lila's lips parted, eyes glossy now. For once, she looked less like a therapist, less like a defendant, and more like a woman who had finally run out of explanations. I was scared, she whispered. Of what? Her voice cracked. Of losing everything. My work, my reputation, the people who believed in me. The judge's voice softened. You lost them the moment you started using your pain as leverage. Silence. For a moment, even the court recorder paused her typing, just watching. Judge Shaw exhaled quietly and leaned back in her chair. That's all I needed to hear. We'll recess until morning. Both sides prepare for final arguments. The gavel came down once. Lila sat motionless, eyes fixed on the floor. She'd handled hundreds of sessions with patients who wept in front of her, who confessed to things they didn't mean to say. She'd always believed she could read guilt, predict shame, diagnose truth. But today, sitting beneath the judge's steady gaze, she realized she wasn't diagnosing anyone. She was the one being read. And Judge Shaw, patient, calm, unyielding, had just read her perfectly. The next morning began under a gray sky. Rain tapped the courthouse windows, the sound steady and unhurried, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. Reporters huddled under umbrellas outside. But the buzz was quieter now. The case had already broken its headline moment when the video played. Now people came not for spectacle, but for resolution. Inside, Lila Keene sat motionless beside her attorney. Her eyes were dull from sleeplessness, her confidence stripped down to the raw edge of exhaustion. Judge Eleanor Shaw entered as always, poised, composed, unflinching. The bailiff called the room to order. Before we proceed to closing statements, the judge began, the court has received a written statement from the victim's family, specifically from Mr. Morales' mother. Lila's head jerked up. She hadn't expected this. The judge adjusted her glasses and unfolded the letter. The paper shook slightly in her hand, not from nerves, but from the weight of what it carried. Your Honor, the mother had written, I've watched this trial from the first day, hoping to understand why. I've seen the defendant cry and I've seen her smile. I've seen her say she forgot. But I have not once heard her say she's sorry. Lila's fingers tightened on the table edge. You say trauma made you forget, the letter continued. But my son didn't forget when the car hit him. He didn't forget when the pain started. He remembered your face the whole time. He told me, before he died, that he saw you standing there, frozen, not screaming, just staring. The sound of the rain outside grew sharper against the glass, like punctuation. You walked away from him that night, and even if you were scared, even if you were in shock, you left him. I can forgive mistakes, but not silence. Not pretending you don't remember because the truth hurts too much. The judge's voice softened. She ends the letter with one sentence. I don't hate her. I just want her to remember. The courtroom was silent. Even Miles Garner, the prosecutor, seemed momentarily subdued. He looked down at his notes, then at the grieving woman seated quietly in the front row. Gray hair, steady hands, the kind of strength that grief doesn't break, only hardens. Judge Shaw folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Thank you, Mrs. Morales. Your words are on record. She turned to the defense. Mr. Hale, you may proceed with your closing. Martin Hale rose slowly, buttoning his jacket. His voice was gentle, his tone deliberate. Your Honor, members of the court, we've heard pain, we've seen contradiction, but beneath all of that, we're still dealing with a human being. One whose judgment, while flawed, was clouded by trauma. He gestured toward Lila, whose eyes were red but dry. She is not a monster. She is a woman who made a terrible mistake under extraordinary emotional distress. Punishment without understanding helps no one. He paused, lowering his voice. You can hold her accountable, but don't erase her humanity while you do it. When he sat, the room stayed still. Then the prosecutor stood. Your Honor, accountability and understanding are not opposites. The truth is, Dr. Keene didn't forget. She chose to forget until she was caught. And if this court allows that to stand, then we're telling every survivor, every victim, that truth only matters when convenient. He looked at Lila. She taught others how to recognize guilt. Now she finally knows what it feels like. He returned to his seat. The judge gave one slow nod. This court will recess for 30 minutes before sentencing. As the gavel fell, Lila let out a quiet breath, the kind that trembles halfway between relief and collapse. But across the room, Mrs. Morales was still watching her, not with hatred, just with the steady, heartbreaking look of someone who would never, ever forget. When court resumed, the tension was thick enough to taste. The audience had fallen into a reverent silence. Even the faint hum of the courthouse air vents sounded intrusive. Judge Eleanor Shaw returned to the bench, her black robe a stark contrast to the pale winter light pouring through the windows. She glanced down at her notes, then at the woman seated before her, Dr. Lila Keene, age 34, former trauma psychologist, now defendant. Dr. Keene, the judge began, her tone low and steady, you've spent your career teaching others about healing. But what I've seen in this courtroom is a lesson in avoidance, how truth can be weaponized when guilt becomes inconvenient. Lila kept her eyes lowered. You claim to forget the night David Morales died. You claim trauma erased your memory. But this court has heard the evidence, the deleted texts, the falsified notes, the staged emotion. You remembered what suited you. You forgot what condemned you. She paused, her gaze hardening. You didn't just leave a man to die. You tried to erase him twice, once at the scene and once in this courtroom. Lila swallowed hard, her lips trembling. Your Honor, I... Don't, Judge Shaw interrupted, her voice quiet but absolute. You've had weeks to speak. Now, you'll listen. Every eye in the courtroom followed the judge as she continued. I've presided over hundreds of cases, violence, fraud, cruelty, but yours stands out because of what it represents, a betrayal of empathy itself. You built a career on compassion, and then used that knowledge to hide from accountability. That is not just tragic, it's dangerous. The judge adjusted her glasses, glancing briefly toward Mrs. Morales, seated in the front row with folded hands. This court acknowledges the profound pain of the victim's family. And while no sentence can restore what's been lost, justice still has meaning, even when mercy must step aside. She turned back to Lila. Before I pronounce sentence, do you have anything to say? Lila hesitated. For the first time since her arrest, she seemed unsure of her words. Her voice came out small, brittle. I thought I was helping him. I didn't mean stop. Judge Shaw's tone was not cruel, just final. You don't get to rewrite your story anymore. A pause hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Dr. Lila Keene, for obstruction of justice, falsification of evidence, and reckless endangerment leading to the death of David Morales, this court sentences you to 20 years in state custody with no eligibility for parole before 15 years have been served. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Furthermore, the judge continued, you are ordered to perform community labor during your incarceration in service to rehabilitation programs for victims of trauma. You will face every day the kind of truth you spent your career avoiding. The gavel came down once, sharp, final. Lila sat frozen, her face blank. No tears, no protests, just the faintest flicker of disbelief. The sound of chains followed seconds later as the bailiff stepped behind her, handcuffs glinting under the courtroom lights. Mrs. Morales stood quietly. She didn't speak or look at Lila, just nodded once toward the judge, then turned to leave. As the courtroom began to empty, Judge Shaw gathered her papers, paused and looked back toward the defense table. "Dr. Keene," she said softly, almost to herself, "there's a difference between pain and punishment. One teaches, the other waits." Lila didn't respond. She simply stared forward, as if trying to memorize the sound of the judge's voice, the voice that had finally ended the story she'd tried so hard to control. And in that still, echoing room, the only truth left was the one she could no longer forget. Get out. The transport van rattled down the long stretch of asphalt leading to Northridge Women's Correctional Facility, a concrete compound nestled between endless fields and razor wire fences. The world outside blurred to muted gray through the reinforced glass. Inside, Lila Keene sat in silence, her wrists cuffed in front of her, the orange jumpsuit rough against her skin. Every bump of the van felt like punctuation, another reminder that each chapter of her old life had ended. 2 seats ahead, another inmate whispered to the woman beside her, "That's the doctor, ain't it? The one from the news?" Lila didn't look up. The whisper spread anyway, bouncing from mouth to mouth until the words hung in the stale air like static. "The shrink who killed that guy said she forgot." "How do you forget something like that?" The driver's radio hummed faintly with the afternoon forecast. Light rain, temperature dropping, icy roads. The sound felt almost mocking in its normalcy. When the van finally stopped, the rear doors swung open and daylight poured in. Cold, harsh, and indifferent. "Keene, out!" the guard barked. Lila stepped down. The air smelled of metal and disinfectant. Ahead, a gate buzzed open, revealing a row of uniformed officers and the steel gray facade of her new home. Intake was mechanical. Fingerprints, photographs, a strip search, an inventory of personal items that no longer mattered. Her wedding ring, surrendered. Her watch, confiscated. The same watch she'd worn the night David Morales died. When they handed her a folded stack of prison linens and a small ID card, the officer at the desk barely looked at her. "You'll be in Block C. Work assignments come tomorrow." Lila nodded mechanically, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am." The corridor to her cell stretched long and sterile, lined with peeling paint and echoes of doors clanging shut. The hum of fluorescent lights filled every pause. As she walked, she caught glimpses of faces through the bars. Women of every kind, some curious, some indifferent, some smiling with the slow confidence of those who already understood the rules here. "Fresh meat," someone murmured. "Psych doctor, huh? Guess she can psychoanalyze us now." She kept her head down. Her assigned cell was small. A metal cot, a thin mattress, and a window so narrow it could barely hold a sliver of sky. On the wall, above the bed, etched into the paint with a piece of metal, were 5 words. "You can't fix yourself here." Lila sat down, the message staring back at her like a diagnosis. For years she had listened to patients confess everything: guilt, fear, addiction, shame. She'd always told them, healing begins with acceptance. But here, under the hum of prison lights, she realized she didn't know what acceptance even looked like. Her thoughts drifted to Judge Shaw's words. "You tried to erase him twice, once at the scene and once in this courtroom." Erase. That was what she'd done her whole life. Erased pain, erased accountability, reframed truth until it fit a narrative she could live with. A buzzer sounded. The metal door of her cell clanged shut, sealing her in. That night, as darkness pressed in from the narrow window, Lila lay awake, listening to the rhythm of the prison. Distant footsteps, muffled voices, the occasional cry of someone dreaming too loud. She thought about Mrs. Morales' letter. "I don't hate her. I just want her to remember." And for the first time since her sentencing, she did remember. The blood, the flashing lights, the sound of sirens blending with her own breathing. The memory came in pieces, sharp and unrelenting. By dawn, she hadn't slept at all, but she no longer tried to convince herself she'd forgotten. Because in this place, with no patience, no audience, and no lies left to tell, memory was the only thing she had left. 3 months into her sentence, Lila Keene had learned to move quietly. She spoke little, kept her head down, and followed the rhythm of the prison like someone surviving inside a storm. Not fighting it, not yielding either. But that morning, something changed. A guard appeared at her cell door with a clipboard. "Keen, you've got a visitor." She blinked, confused. "Who?" "Didn't say. Come on." Visits were rare for her. No family, no friends. Most of her colleagues had cut contact after her conviction. Walking down the hall toward the visitation area, she wondered if it might be someone from the press, or worse, one of her former patients, looking for closure. The room was small and gray, divided by a pane of scratched glass. On the other side sat Mrs. Morales, the mother of the man she'd let die. Lila froze mid-step. Her throat tightened. The guard gestured. "Go on." She sat, slowly, carefully. The phone between them felt heavier than it should. Mrs. Morales lifted her receiver first. Her face was calm, almost gentle. "You look thinner," she said. "Are they treating you all right?" Lila hesitated before lifting her own phone. "Yes. I mean, as well as they can." A pause stretched. "I wasn't expecting you," Lila finally said. Mrs. Morales nodded. "I know. I wasn't expecting to come." "Why did you?" The older woman's eyes didn't flinch. "Because I've been thinking about what I wrote in my letter. I told you I wanted you to remember. But that's not enough, is it? Remembering doesn't change anything." Lila's voice wavered. "I can't undo it. I've thought about that every day." "Good," Mrs. Morales said softly. "But thinking isn't the same as understanding." She leaned slightly forward. "You watched my son die, Dr. Keen. You didn't hold him, you didn't scream for help, you didn't even close his eyes, but he forgave you before he stopped breathing." Lila's fingers went cold. "That's not possible." "It is. He told me, he said, 'She didn't mean it, Mom. She's just scared.' Those were his last words." Lila's breath caught, tears pricking her eyes for the first time since the trial. "I didn't deserve that," she whispered. "No," Mrs. Morales agreed quietly. "You didn't. But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about letting go of hate before it kills what's left of you." Silence. The hum of the lights filled the space between them. Lila stared at the floor, voice trembling. "I thought I could fix people. I thought I could explain pain, measure it, categorize it, but I didn't even understand my own." Mrs. Morales smiled faintly, sad, but not cruel. "Understanding doesn't come from books, it comes from loss, and you've lost plenty now." A long moment passed before the older woman slowly placed her hand against the glass. Hesitant, Lila mirrored the gesture. "You'll have to live with this," Mrs. Morales said, her tone steady but kind. "That's your sentence, not the walls. You wake up with the truth every morning. That's the hard labor they can't write on paper." Then softly, "I forgive you." Lila's tears finally fell. She pressed her forehead to the glass, shaking silently. The guard tapped on the door. "Time's up." Mrs. Morales rose. Before turning to leave, she said one last thing, words that would echo in Lila's mind long after she was gone. "My son believed people could change. Don't make him wrong." When the door shut behind her, the room fell into silence again. Lila stayed seated long after the visit ended, her palms still pressed to the cold glass, her reflection staring back at her. For the first time in her life, she didn't try to analyze the feeling. She just let it hurt. That night, back in her cell, Lila Keen lay awake staring at the ceiling, the same cracked paint she'd memorized 100 times before. But tonight it looked different. Mrs. Morales' words still echoed in her head. My son believed people could change. Don't make him wrong. Change. The one thing she'd preached about, written about, promised others they could find, yet never truly believed for herself. For years, she had built a life on understanding other people's trauma. But sitting there, under flickering fluorescent light, she finally understood what accountability felt like. Not as punishment, but as clarity. For the first time in months, she didn't try to rationalize. She didn't hide behind psychology or professional vocabulary. She just sat with the pain, raw and unfiltered. When the lights dimmed for the night, she whispered softly into the darkness, "I remember now." The sound barely reached the walls, but it felt like the first honest thing she'd said in years. Outside her window, snow had begun to fall. Quiet, relentless, cleansing. This story is a work of fiction. It's not based on real events, but on the emotions and moral truths that play out in real courtrooms every day. Now I want to hear from you. If you were sitting in that courtroom, listening to both women, the grieving mother and the guilty doctor, what would you have said? Do you believe forgiveness like that is possible, or even deserved? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. And before you go, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our daily courtroom stories that explore justice, empathy, and the cost of truth. Share this video with someone who loves true-to-life stories about accountability and redemption. And while our other videos appear on screen, go ahead and watch the next one right now. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story that'll make you think twice about what justice really means.